Welcome to BL Stories, where romance, drama, and unforgettable boys' love come to life. Love knows no limits, and the best stories aren't always straight. Subscribe now and join our growing BL-loving family. Sweat trickled down my neck as I lay there, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had something happened between us? My mind felt foggy, as if my brain had deliberately blocked out parts of last night. Maybe to protect me from feeling guilty? But then I noticed I was still wearing my clothes. I let out a quiet breath of relief. I tried to inch away from him carefully, not wanting to wake him. Facing whatever awkward conversation would follow wasn't something I was ready for. But as his warmth pressed against my back, I hesitated. It was comfortable. Against my better judgment, I closed my eyes again. No point stressing over something that might be nothing. When I woke up again, I startled. This wasn't my room. I heard the soft sound of someone brushing their teeth in the bathroom nearby. The fact that I was still in Swash's room meant last night hadn't been a dream. Or could this still be one? I pinched myself. No luck. Definitely real. I sat up slowly, glancing toward the bathroom. I couldn't see him, but the sound of him spitting into the sink confirmed he was still there. My mouth felt awful, and I wondered if he'd thought to get me a toothbrush too. Moments later, he stepped into the room, flashing me a smile. I didn't smile back. Good morning. Sleep okay? What happened last night? What do you mean? Why am I in your room? Oh, that. I frowned. He gave me a playful smile, clearly enjoying my confusion. I didn't have patience for games. Well, I pressed. You fell asleep watching TV. Okay, so why didn't you just leave me there? You were shivering. And your solution was to bring me here? You know a blanket could have solved that. I tried, he said casually. Didn't help. And? We're on the 7th floor. It gets pretty cold up here at night. I'd left the window open, and it was freezing. So, you thought carrying me to your room was the best solution? He shrugged. You only stopped shaking once I picked you up. I figured maybe body warmth would help. I stared at him, unimpressed. Why not just take me to the guest room and turn on the radiator? This was easier. My room was already warm. Right. And for the record, he added quickly, I put you on the far side of the bed once you settled down. It's not like we cuddled or anything. I stayed quiet. I remembered waking up in the night and realizing he was holding me. I hadn't moved. If that's all he remembered, I wasn't about to correct him. I got up and walked into the living room. A chill ran through me as I stepped away from his heated room. He wasn't lying. The apartment really was cold. I rubbed my arms, then headed for the bathroom. Sure enough, a toothbrush and toothpaste were waiting. As I brushed my teeth, my thoughts swirled. I'd felt strangely safe last night. I shouldn't have liked it. I already had someone in my life, and Swash clearly had his own complicated situation with Rodney. Whatever this strange closeness was, it couldn't mean anything. It wasn't supposed to. When I walked back out, Swash was dressed sharply in a blue shirt and gray pants, busy tying his tie. He looked different, older, more professional. A reminder that, despite everything, he had a life completely separate from mine. A job. A child. Responsibilities. Hey, is my tie straight? It's crooked. Move it a little to the right. He adjusted. Now it was off the other way. Too far. Shift it back a little. He fumbled with it again, looking frustrated. Can you just fix it for me? His tone was short, but not unkind. I walked over to him and carefully adjusted the tie, tightening it neatly. He watched me the whole time, silent. Once done, I stepped back. Thanks, he said softly. I waited, wondering if he had more to say. But after a pause, he simply turned and walked back to his room. I stood there, unsure what that moment had meant. Eventually, I made my way to the kitchen and opened the fridge. There was so much food, I didn't know where to start. After a moment of indecision, I settled on scrambled eggs and toast. As I worked, Swash appeared at the door, ready to leave. Won't you eat before you go? Sorry. I'm running late. I'm meeting Rod. I'll be back later tonight. Okay, I mumbled. Rodney. My heart sank. I didn't want to think about what Swash and Rodney were doing when they were together, but my imagination wasn't being helpful. I shook the thoughts away and focused on cooking, trying to distract myself. By the time I sat down with my breakfast, I'd calmed down. I switched on the TV and flicked through channels, finally settling on some show about teenage vampires. It was silly, but oddly entertaining. I laughed quietly to myself. Falling in love with your food? That was new. Imagining a vampire dating their prey felt ridiculous, yet somehow kind of sweet. As I finished eating, I thought about the day ahead. I wasn't in the mood to go anywhere. I wasn't in the mood for much of anything. After cleaning up the dishes, I returned to the couch, pulling a blanket around me. The TV droned on with some reality show about teenagers arguing over birthday parties. I sighed. Life felt so strange, confusing, and I wasn't sure why being in Swash's arms last night had felt like the safest place in the world. When I woke up, the sky outside was a deep dusk blue. I glanced at the clock. 7:26 p.m. There had to be something magical about this couch. I kept falling asleep on it without meaning to. I sat up slowly and yawned. I was hungry again. A door clicked shut nearby, followed by footsteps from down the hall. Swash appeared, still dressed in his work clothes, minus the tie. But his expression, it wasn't his usual calm. He looked worried, frustrated, even upset. My concern spiked immediately. "Swash?" I asked softly. He blinked, as if realizing I was there. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I could tell he was faking it. "What's wrong? I thought you weren't coming back until later." Swash sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Whatever was on his mind, it was weighing him down. For a moment, fear crept into me. Had I done something wrong? He crossed the room and dropped onto the couch beside me. I shifted to give him space. "Rodney came back earlier than I thought." "Okay," I said carefully, unsure where this was going. "I asked him to help today. I needed someone to pick up Bradley, and my schedule was packed. Rod was free, so he drove over to Columbus for me. I figured he'd be back late after visiting Cher for a while, but apparently not." I let out a quiet breath of relief. At least whatever was bothering Swash wasn't about me. And it also wasn't about Rodney in the way I had feared. Somehow, knowing they weren't involved gave me a strange sense of comfort. But Swash still looked upset. There was more to this story. "So, Rod and Cheryl are good friends?" "Yeah, college friends. They tried dating casually once, but it didn't work out. They settled on friendship instead. I expected them to catch up today, but their conversation turned serious." "About what?" Swash's jaw tightened. His eyes burned with anger, the same look I remembered from years ago, when he'd slammed a locker shut in frustration. It made my stomach sink. "They talked about the divorce." I held my breath. "Why?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Tony was hurting Bradley." Froze shut. His words hit harder than I expected. My chest tightened, understanding why Swash was so tense, why anger radiated from every part of him. I could imagine how much he wished he'd gone himself, just to protect his son. Without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. I didn't plan it, it just felt right. His fingers curled around mine gently. His eyes softened, though sadness lingered there. Swash's voice lowered as he continued. "Cheryl said it wasn't always like that. At first, Tony seemed like a decent stepdad. He even looked happy to be part of Bradley's life. Cher had told Brad about me from the start. Brad used to call Tony Dad, and me Real Dad." He chuckled faintly, though his expression was bittersweet. Kids aren't exactly subtle. He fell silent, lost in thought. "So, what changed?" I asked softly. Swash's smile disappeared. Everything changed after Cheryl had their second child. Money was tight. Tony started getting resentful, feeling like he had to take care of Bradley when, in his mind, he should have been my responsibility. They fought about it a lot. Cheryl tried to remind him that Bradley was her son, too, but Tony didn't care. He wanted out of the arrangement. I listened quietly, heart aching. Cheryl didn't want a divorce. She was scared. She didn't think she could handle raising all 3 kids alone. But 2 days ago, she caught Tony hitting Bradley. She didn't know what started it. She just knew it wasn't the first time. That was the last straw. She told Rod she couldn't keep Bradley in that house any longer. So, she gave me full custody. Swash's voice cracked slightly. I tightened my grip on his hand to let him know I was there. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and this time his smile wasn't forced. I smiled back, silently promising him I'd listen to whatever he needed to say. "You've always wanted him with you," I said gently. "Yeah." He squeezed my hand. "But not like this." We sat there quietly for a few seconds, both of us absorbing everything. Then, Swash pulled back slightly and smirked just a little, like the weight on his shoulders had lightened. "Go take a shower. You stink." I blinked. "What?" "I don't want Bradley waking up and thinking you're a stray cat. Go on. I'm about to start dinner." I laughed softly. "Does he know about me?" "Of course. I told him all about you." His words surprised me, but I didn't ask for details. I let go of his hand and headed toward the bathroom, leaving him in the kitchen. When I got there, I noticed something new, a small toothbrush sitting beside mine. I smiled faintly. Swash was already doing everything he could to make his son feel at home. As I showered, my mind wandered. Poor Bradley. Being passed between adults, confused about who to trust, and now learning that the person he called Dad had hurt him. His whole understanding of family must have been shaken. I couldn't even imagine what that felt like. Once I finished, I changed into a plain t-shirt and track pants. Swash had stocked my wardrobe with everything, from formal blazers to basic clothes. Sometimes wearing what he bought me felt like accepting charity, but I didn't have much choice. When I returned to the living room, I saw Bradley sitting on a bean bag pulled close to the TV. He was completely focused, eyes glued to the screen. I sat down quietly on the couch, watching him without disturbing him. His hair was a light brown, strands catching the light like gold. His eyes were gray. Even now, his features resembled Swash's, though softer, rounder with childhood. His nose, small and delicate, must have come from Cheryl. Still, he looked perfect. I glanced at the screen. He wasn't watching cartoons or superheroes. It was National Geographic. He seemed completely fascinated by a documentary on the archerfish, which shot water jets at insects above the water's surface. The explanations were technical, talking about physics, refraction, and precision. I didn't even know that much. Maybe I should start watching educational channels more often. Suddenly, a loud crackle from the kitchen startled both of us. Bradley spun around. His gray eyes locked on mine. Then he lit up, grinning ear to ear. "Meat." My jaw dropped. He knew my old nickname. Happened? Red-faced and embarrassed, I stared into Bradley's curious eyes. Time seemed to slow. There was no mistaking what I'd just heard. Meat? For a moment, confusion swirled in my mind. Had Swash somehow mentioned my old nickname to his son? Did Bradley know about my past? Surely not. Swash wouldn't share something like that with a child. Before I could overthink any further, Bradley stood up from his beanbag and toddled toward me. I instinctively leaned back into the couch, only to realize he walked right past me. Straight to the kitchen. Time snapped back into motion. I turned, watching him attempt to climb onto a tall kitchen stool. Swash smiled softly as he helped his son, busy preparing something at the counter. Then I noticed what he was holding. Steak. I cringed internally. Of course. Meat was exactly what it sounded like. Bradley hadn't even been looking at me. His focus was entirely on Swash and the sizzling food. Still, the excitement in his voice had seemed so personal. I had to ask, "Swash, why is Bradley so excited about meat?" Only then did Bradley notice me, blinking shyly. Swash glanced over his shoulder as he answered, "Tony's vegetarian." Cheryl followed his lead, and naturally, the kids had to as well. But when Bradley stays here, he gets to have proper meals. Right, Brad? Bradley grinned mischievously, the kind of smile only a child could pull off. My heart softened a little. His bright gray eyes lit up as he watched Swash slice the steak into smaller pieces and season them carefully. I could almost imagine how he felt. If I'd spent my whole life forced to eat vegetables, a proper meal would feel like a dream too. I moved closer, standing beside them. Swash tossed the seasoned pieces into the pan, and we all quietly watched the meat sizzle, the aroma filling the kitchen. Then Swash glanced between Bradley and me. "Brad," he said gently, "this is Michael." Bradley looked up, his gaze uncertain. I gave a small, friendly smile. "Hi, Bradley." "Hi," he replied quietly, eyes darting away. He seemed nervous. I looked at Swash, silently asking if something was wrong. Swash just gave me a reassuring smile. Maybe Bradley was just shy. Swash plated dinner, giving Bradley a smaller serving, then motioned us to the table. I followed, sitting down quietly. Dinner passed in near silence, with Bradley occasionally glancing at me, only to look away whenever I met his eyes. I smiled to myself and focused on my meal. After we finished eating and Swash handled the dishes, he guided Bradley off to bed. I stayed in the living room, watching National Geographic. After all, if a kid could enjoy this channel, maybe I could too. 15 minutes later, I knew more about star-nosed moles than I'd ever wanted to. I switched the TV off. As I headed to my room, Swash emerged from Bradley's. We paused, standing silently in the hallway for a moment. He gave a quiet sigh, wished me good night, and disappeared into his room. I went into mine, curling under the duvet, only to remember I'd forgotten to turn on the radiator. Grumbling, I got up to fix it, then slid back into bed once the room started to warm. I closed my eyes, but somehow, it didn't feel warm enough. The sound of rain woke me the next morning. The sky outside was gray and heavy, the kind of day that made you want to stay in bed. I forced myself up and cleaned up in the bathroom, noting Bradley's partially unpacked suitcase in his open room. Settling in takes time, I reminded myself. In the living room, I found Bradley devouring an omelet with a glass of orange juice. Swash stumbled out of his room moments later, struggling with his tie, looking tired but relieved when he spotted me. Without a word, he let his hands drop from the knot. I stepped forward, understanding the silent request. "Dad, we're going to be late," Bradley called from behind me. I know. "Almost ready," Swash replied, his voice strained. I glanced between them. "What's going on?" "Bradley's first day at school." My eyebrows rose. "Already?" "Yeah. Got it sorted last week. It's a private school, but not the fancy kind. I want him meeting regular kids, not the spoiled upper-class crowd." "Pretty sure some of those regular kids might still think he's a spoiled rich kid," I teased. Swash chuckled softly. I finished adjusting his tie. He whispered a quiet thanks before moving to help Bradley down from his seat. Swash cleaned up the dishes quickly and guided Bradley toward the door. I stood there watching them, realizing, strangely, how much it felt like watching a family leave for the day. Like I was the one left behind. A quiet house. Just me and my thoughts. Swash tossed a quick goodbye over his shoulder as he led Bradley out toward the elevator. "Have fun," I called softly after them. Bradley glanced back, gave me a small smile, then hurried to catch up with Swash. I closed the door behind them and stood in the quiet. Suddenly, I felt very alone. The rest of the day passed quietly. I wandered to the large window, staring out at the rainy Chicago streets below. The city looked distant, almost unreal, like it belonged to someone else. I heard the hum of Swash's car pulling out of the parking area, watched it vanish down the street. I sighed. Another long, quiet day ahead. The apartment felt too empty without them. And though the ache in my body was easing, the weight of my thoughts wasn't. I thought about Emmett, Alex, Nathan, and Jason. I wondered what they were doing, if they were thinking of me. I wondered if Malone missed me yet. I hadn't called him in 2 days. Not exactly a great way to start a relationship. I shook my head, trying to push those thoughts aside. I'd trapped myself in this little slice of quiet, and I wasn't sure how to break free. Maybe I wasn't ready to. Not yet. The sudden ringing of the phone startled me out of my thoughts. My quiet daydream vanished as I sat up, scanning the room for the noise. That's when I spotted it, a small cordless phone, tucked neatly in its charging dock under the massive television. No wonder I hadn't noticed it before. Compared to the oversized TV, the little black device practically blended into the shadows. I hesitated. It wasn't my house. Answering felt intrusive. I told myself the caller would give up soon. I was wrong. By the 8th ring, frustration got the better of me. I grabbed the phone, deciding to at least take a message. Hello. Oh, thank goodness. Mike, I thought you'd left the house. Swash. I blinked in surprise. Why are you calling the house phone? I need a huge favor, he said, his tone rushed. I need you to pick Bradley up from school. I looked up at the clock. 2:13 p.m. Where had the day gone? The sky still looked overcast, making it hard to tell. What? Is that even okay? Won't they need some kind of permission or ID? Don't worry. Brad will come straight to you, and I've already given the school your name. I'm stuck in a board meeting. Lead speaker. Can't leave. I hesitated but finally gave in. Okay, where's the school? He rattled off the address, thanked me quickly, and hung up. I headed to my room to change and grab the house keys. As I stepped outside, the crisp air hit me. The neighborhood was quiet. Most people here were probably off at work. It felt nothing like the lively, colorful chaos of Boys Town. I shoved my hands in my pockets and scanned the street for a cab. Nothing. And as the chill seeped deeper, something struck me. Bradley hadn't brought a jacket this morning. Concern tugged at me. I turned around and jogged back to the apartment. After rummaging through his open suitcase, I found a small jacket. That's when my gaze caught on a photograph wedged among his things. Cheryl smiled in the photo, holding a man around the waist with a baby in her arms. She looked older now. I barely remembered her from high school, a face among the cheerleaders always orbiting Swash. I guess she was the only one who'd left with more than just memories. The man beside her, her husband I assumed, looked about Swash's age. He had reddish-orange hair but not a single freckle, oddly handsome in a quiet sort of way. He held Cheryl close with one hand and their energetic little girl with the other. The child's bright grin lit up the photo. Then there was Bradley, standing close but somehow distant. His smile was small, hesitant. I felt a pang in my chest. How long had he felt out of place? Had anyone noticed before Cheryl finally did? I pushed the photo back into the suitcase and zipped it shut, my mood somber. Jacket in hand, I headed back outside and quickly flagged down a cab. The ride to Bradley's school was long. Longer than I expected. I couldn't help but wonder why Swash had chosen a school so far away. Surely there were decent options closer to home. If it were me, I'd want Bradley somewhere nearby, somewhere that didn't mean a daily commute across half the city. By the time we pulled up outside, I was grateful I'd asked the driver to wait. The school itself was impressive, modern, sleek glass and brick, with an air of quiet confidence. Maybe that's what Swash had wanted for his son, a place that looked like it belonged to the future. Somehow, it suited Bradley. He seemed sharp enough to thrive in a place like this. I walked inside and was surprised to find an actual reception area, like an office building. I gave Bradley's full name, and the receptionist smiled kindly, informing me that he was waiting in his classroom. A young woman named Lillian arrived to guide me down the hallways. She seemed friendly, maybe too friendly. I caught the way she kept glancing at me, cheeks slightly pink. I sighed inwardly. Not the time. As we walked, Lillian explained how the school used observation windows beside each classroom. Apparently, the staff believed in evaluating teachers when they thought no one was watching. A little unsettling, but probably effective. We arrived at Bradley's classroom. From the wide window, I caught a glimpse of him sitting quietly inside. And then I heard it, a familiar voice from just beyond the door. Deep, confident, unmistakable. Someone was saying goodbye to the teachers. The door opened at the same moment I reached for it. And I found myself face to face with the last person I ever wanted to see. Mr. Bedlam. Or as I'd once known him, Beatham. My stomach twisted. Not here. Not now. Mr. Beatham froze, blinking as he stared at me. My throat felt tight, my pulse loud in my ears. I wasn't sure why I felt so nervous. Maybe it was the fear of being embarrassed in front of a classroom full of little kids. Without saying a word, he let out a small grunt, gently guided his daughter forward and continued down the hallway. Only once did he glance back. I exhaled slowly. Maybe he kept quiet because calling me out would risk exposing himself too. After all, how could he explain knowing someone like me? Lillian's voice broke my thoughts. Do you two know each other? My mind scrambled. Technically, yes. But not in a way I could explain. Not really friends, are you? Not really, I admitted. Well, thanks for not making a scene. I gave a half shake of my head, unsure what response made sense. Lillian led me toward the classroom. The teacher inside, a warm, middle-aged woman, waved me in cheerfully. Lillian smiled goodbye and walked away. Bradley was in the corner of the room, building a multicolored two-story house out of blocks. His construction was precise and neat, better than anything the other kids were putting together. A small girl beside him helped quietly, handing him blocks between working on her own project. Here for Bradley? The teacher asked kindly. I nodded. She hesitated. And you're? I'm a friend of his dad, I said, preparing for suspicion. To my surprise, she chuckled. What's funny? I asked, puzzled. Oh, nothing. You just look a little alike. I thought maybe you were an uncle or something. I blinked. That wasn't something I'd considered. Sure, my hair was light brown like Bradley's, though not quite as golden. And our faces, maybe there was a similarity. Strange. Brad? She called softly. He kept working on his Lego house, not reacting at all. The teacher smiled gently. When he's focused like that, it's hard to get his attention. Is that a problem? Not at all. Honestly, it's impressive. Most kids can't concentrate this long. But Bradley, he's special. Her fond smile surprised me. Day one, and he'd already won over the teacher. I stepped closer and touched Bradley's shoulder. He jumped slightly, turned toward me, and when he recognized who I was, looked away shyly. Time to go, I said softly. He stood, carefully carrying his half-finished Lego house to the teacher. She accepted it with a proud smile. I'll finish it tomorrow, he promised quietly. He grabbed his bag without another word and walked straight past me. I thanked the teacher and followed, half expecting him to slow down, but he didn't. When I reached the front desk, I found him already sitting there, swinging his legs, waiting for me. I offered him my hand to help him down from the chair. Ready to go home? He ignored my hand and slid down on his own. Something about the way he kept avoiding me stung a little, but I tried not to show it. Hands in my pockets, I walked slowly enough for him to keep pace beside me. Our taxi driver looked more impatient than before but seemed relieved to see us. I gave him Swash's address as we climbed inside. We'd been driving for a while when Bradley finally spoke, a quiet mumble I almost missed. I leaned closer. What was that? I'm hungry. Oh, what would you like to eat? He hesitated, then looked at me with a serious expression. A hamburger. I nodded. All right. There was something in his gaze, calm yet determined, that reminded me of Swash. No way I could argue with that. I asked the driver to stop at the nearest Burger King, then paid the fare. It wasn't cheap. Inside, we stood in line amid groups of school kids and tired parents. I ordered a kid's meal with fries and a soda. We found a small booth in the corner. Bradley ate quietly, eyes mostly fixed on his tray. I sipped my drink and studied him, wondering what he was thinking. Much like his father, his expression gave nothing away. He finished his meal and, without looking up, asked softly if he could use the bathroom. I walked him there and waited outside. He took his time. When he finally finished, I heard the sink running and peeked inside. Bradley stood there, struggling to reach the faucet. I stepped forward without a word, lifting him gently by the waist so he could wash his hands properly. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of us together, his small, serious face beside mine. For a fleeting moment, I saw what the teacher meant. With the right story, someone could believe he was my son. I smiled quietly to myself. Finished, he said, nudging me gently. I lowered him to the ground. Without waiting, he marched back toward our booth. By the time I caught up, another couple had claimed our table. Could you hand me the small backpack? I asked politely. The woman blinked in surprise before quickly passing it over. And his jacket? I asked the man, who hurried to hand it to me after realizing he'd been sitting on it. We stepped back out onto the sidewalk, Bradley walking silently beside me. I scanned for a cab, but before I could flag one down, I felt a small tug on my hand. Bradley had reached for me. Wordlessly. For the first time that day, he held onto my hand. And suddenly, the silence between us felt less distant, and a little more like trust. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I'm cold," Bradley whispered. "Oh, sorry." I suddenly remembered I was still holding his jacket. I handed it to him and reached out to help, but he gently pushed my hands away. "I can do it." "Sure." His quiet independence stung a little. He didn't seem to want my help, even when I offered. I knew he was trying to be grown up, but would it really hurt to let someone help him now and then? The thought barely formed before another one hit me. I was doing the same thing to Swash. A small smile tugged at my lips. It had taken a 5-year-old to show me how stubborn and ungrateful I'd been. Life had a strange way of teaching lessons. Traffic was a nightmare. By the time we reached home, the clock read 6:48 p.m. Before I could even ring the doorbell, Swash threw the door open, panic written across his face. "What happened? Where were you two?" "Traffic was bad. Sorry it took so long." "You were in traffic for 3 hours? The school said you left around 3. Why didn't you call?" "My phone's dead, and I left my charger at my apartment." Swash ran a hand through his hair, clearly overwhelmed. I was this close to calling the police. Then, unexpectedly, Bradley's small voice came from beside me. "We went to Burger King." Swash's entire expression softened. Relief washed over his features as he crouched in front of his son. "Did you have fun?" "I had a hamburger." Swash smiled, looking up at me. His gaze wasn't angry anymore, just grateful. I smiled back, understanding his fear now. I wasn't family. I was just a friend, and trusting someone else with your child, it couldn't be easy. He gently guided Bradley toward the living room. I followed, collapsing onto the couch. For some reason, I felt exhausted. It wasn't physical, Bradley hadn't worn me out, but mentally, I was drained. Keeping up with his quiet moods and unpredictable silences had taken more out of me than I realized. "Dinner's ready," Swash called softly. I forced myself off the couch and joined them at the table, wincing slightly as I moved. Sitting hurt more than I wanted to admit. Over dinner, Swash tried to make conversation, but Bradley answered every question in his own way, sometimes off-topic, sometimes cryptic. "What did you do in school today?" Swash asked. Bradley frowned. "Mrs. Perry said we have to hand in our homework before second class tomorrow." "What's the homework about?" Bradley looked down. "I don't really enjoy anything in this neighborhood. I don't know what to write about." Swash looked over at me and smiled awkwardly. I shrugged. He knew his son better than I ever could. Still, there was something quietly clever about Bradley's answer. Without even realizing it, he'd given us more information than we asked for. Not only did he mention the homework's deadline, but also the reason he was struggling. He simply hadn't lived here long enough to like anything yet. I found myself smiling. "Maybe you could write about something you wish you could do in the neighborhood." Both Swash and Bradley blinked at me, surprised. "It's just an idea," I added quickly, unsure why they looked so startled. Then Swash's expression softened into a wide smile. Even Bradley seemed to consider it, nodding slightly. "That's actually a really good idea," Swash said, his voice warm. "You'll enjoy writing it more that way." After dinner, Bradley sat at the table to work on his homework while Swash stayed nearby to help. I thought about watching TV but felt too tired. Instead, I wished them good night and headed to bed. As I crawled under the blanket, I remembered I'd forgotten to turn on the radiator. But I didn't care. I'd survive. And if not, well, at least I'd be remembered as a stylishly frozen corpse, I joked to myself. The chirping of birds woke me far too early. I groaned. 6:46 a.m. The sky outside was still gray, and I felt like I needed another few hours of sleep. But nature disagreed. I had to get up. I shuffled out of my room into the cold hallway, realizing someone had left a window open again. In the bathroom, I heard the sound of someone brushing their teeth, probably Bradley. As I reached the bathroom door, he turned sharply, standing on a small stool to reach the sink. In his sudden movement, the toothbrush holder tipped over. I watched in horror as my toothbrush sailed through the air and landed neatly in the toilet. "Bradley!" I blurted, more from shock than anger. He froze, staring at the toilet, realizing what he'd done. Then he turned back to me, wide-eyed, and slowly backed away until he pressed against the wall. His face crumpled in fear. I frowned, confused. It was just a toothbrush. Why did he look so terrified? I stepped forward to pick it up. Bradley flinched. He raised his hands to cover his face, as if he thought I might hit him. "Hey, it's okay," I said softly, but before I could move closer, a voice came from the hallway. "What's going on?" Swash appeared. I looked up at him, standing frozen in the bathroom, Bradley trembling against the wall with his hands over his face. And I saw it. How this must have looked. Like I was the reason Bradley was scared. Like he was protecting himself from me. "Swash, it's not," I started, but Swash's face darkened. His eyes filled with fury. My stomach dropped. This wasn't good. Not at all. I felt trapped, standing there as Swash stared at me, his expression full of anger and confusion. He didn't move. Maybe he was waiting for me to say something, or explain what I knew couldn't be explained easily. Behind me, Bradley still cowered against the wall, too frightened to move. My heart ached. Had he been treated so badly by Tony that he assumed every mistake would end in punishment? I slowly crossed the bathroom, crouching down in front of Bradley so we were eye level. Carefully, I took his little hands and gently lowered them from his face. His wide eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I tried to smile, but I could feel the tight knot in my chest refusing to loosen. "Hey, it's okay," I said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'll never hurt you. It's just a toothbrush, all right?" He didn't respond, but he let me pull him into a quiet hug. His small body trembled as he cried softly against my shoulder. I could smell the faint scent of toothpaste on his breath as he sobbed. I held him until his breathing slowed, then gently pulled back to wipe his tears. He looked at me, confused and guilty, but didn't speak. "Come on, buddy," I whispered. "Let's get you ready for school." He nodded faintly and walked toward his bedroom. I followed him to the door, where Swash still stood frozen. His eyes were locked on the spot where Bradley had cowered. I touched his arm gently. He blinked and looked at me as if snapping out of a trance. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't what?" His voice cracked slightly. "Don't drive to Columbus. Don't go after Tony." Swash clenched his jaw. "But look at what he's done to Bradley. How does someone hurt a child like that?" "Bradley's safe now," I said softly. "He'll heal." Swash glared at me for a moment, frustrated. I wasn't excusing Tony's behavior. I hated it just as much as he did, but there was no point in getting Swash arrested over it. Bradley needed him more than he needed revenge. "How do you know?" Swash asked, voice low. I paused, thinking carefully. "Because he has his real dad now." Swash's tense expression softened, just slightly. I gave his shoulder a light pat and started walking back toward my room. Before I could step inside, Swash caught my hand, pulling me to a stop. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being the one thinking clearly. If you weren't here, I probably would have done something reckless." "You're protective." "That's good," I smiled faintly. "At least until he becomes a teenager." Swash chuckled softly and let go of my hand. I went to my room and quietly closed the door behind me, exhaling heavily. Even though I'd kept a calm face, I'd been terrified moments ago. Terrified Swash would assume the worst and lash out before I could explain. But now, I understood why Bradley kept his distance from me. To him, I was just another adult, and after what Tony had done, trusting anyone wasn't easy. I sighed as I collapsed onto my bed, thinking about how unfair it all was. Bradley didn't deserve any of this. I only hoped, despite what I'd told Swash, that he really would be okay. I squirmed uncomfortably. And then, of course, I remembered why I'd gotten out of bed in the first place. I still needed to use the bathroom. By 7:43 a.m., Bradley was ready for school. He glanced at me more often now, and when I met his eyes, he didn't look away as quickly. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. I smiled to myself as I sat down for breakfast. Swash came out of his room, half-dressed, a tie hanging loosely around his neck. "Michael!" "Yeah." He pointed at the tie. "Help." I laughed softly and walked over. "This has basically become my job, hasn't it?" "Pretty much." He grinned. As I tightened the knot, I joked, "Should I pick Bradley up today too?" Swash raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You'll do that?" "Thanks." I blinked, realizing my sarcasm had just earned me another errand. Well, once I finished the tie, Swash stepped back and did a dramatic spin, striking a ridiculous pose. I laughed, and Bradley peeked up from his cereal bowl, watching us like we were aliens. That only made me laugh harder. "Ready, Brad?" Swash asked. "Almost." Bradley gulped down the last of his milk, dropped the bowl carefully, and slid off his chair. He grabbed Swash's hand but looked up at me. I waved gently. "Bye, Bradley." "Bye, Michael. Have a nice day." He smiled, a real, honest smile, and nodded. I felt a quiet warmth in my chest. He really did seem like a different kid today. As they stepped outside, Swash turned back with a grin. "Bye, honey." I rolled my eyes. "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that." His laugh echoed back as he shut the door behind him. And just like that, I felt like a stay-at-home parent. By 2 o'clock, I found myself watching the clock, surprisingly eager to head out for school pickup. I wasn't sure why. I didn't exactly enjoy the long trip, but maybe I just wanted to get out of the house. The morning had passed slowly. After showering and cleaning up the kitchen, I ended up watching yet another National Geographic special, this one about dolphins. Weirdly, I found myself enjoying it. When Swash called to remind me about picking up Bradley, I nearly jumped for the phone. "You were sitting next to the phone, weren't you?" he teased. "No," I lied quickly. He chuckled, and for some reason, that sound sent a strange warmth through me. "I left some cash for the cab and for Bradley's meal on your dresser." "Thanks." When did you even get into my room?" "About 5 this morning." "You're adorable when you sleep." "That's slightly creepy, but thanks." I laughed awkwardly, unsure why I found it funny. "Did you know you snore a little?" "No, I don't." I felt myself flush. Great. That wasn't something I wanted to know. "It's not loud or anything." "I think it's kind of nice." I blushed even harder, thankful he couldn't see my face. "Don't you have work to do?" I deflected quickly. Tired of me already?" "I thought maybe we could." I hung up before he could finish, laughing to myself. I went to my room to collect the money from the dresser. $300. Swash really overdid things. I wasn't complaining. I pocketed the cash, grabbed my keys, and took 2 jackets with me. October had officially arrived, and the air outside confirmed it. Finding a cab took nearly 20 minutes. One more reminder that I really needed to learn how to drive. Picking Bradley up this time felt a lot easier. Lillian seemed happy to chat as she walked with me, even though I already knew where to go. Thankfully, there was no sign of bedlam, or any other parent for that matter. But even so, I was running late. I spotted Bradley in the same corner of the room as yesterday, working carefully on what looked like the same Lego house. Only now it had a 3rd floor. His teacher, Mrs. Perry, looked excited when she saw me. "Bradley handed in a wonderful assignment today." I smiled. "Really?" He took such a unique approach to the topic. The other children wrote about things they enjoyed doing in their neighborhood. But Bradley, he wrote about the things he wished people did more often. Like what? Bigger play areas, dog parks, neighborhood get-togethers. He wrote about wanting people to spend more time together. He said the way things are now makes people lonely and disconnected. She laughed softly. Can you imagine? A child his age thinking about how people are becoming isolated even with all this social networking. He's quite something, isn't he? I just nodded. I watched Bradley more closely as she spoke. He really was remarkable. I even liked the way he gave odd answers sometimes or avoided eye contact, because behind all of that, I knew he was thinking. Those intelligent, quiet eyes told me as much. Please, don't let me fall for this kid. Too late. He looked up at me and smiled. My heart softened instantly. As we walked out of the school together, Bradley slipped on his jacket and looked up at me, waiting patiently. Hungry? I asked. He nodded. What would you like today? A hamburger. I chuckled. Of course. Anything else? From McDonald's. Very specific. Anything else besides that? I want to go to the dinosaur museum. I hesitated. Maybe we should ask your dad about that. I think he'd want to come too. You mean my real dad? I smiled gently. Yes. Your real dad. Bradley nodded, satisfied with the answer. I made a mental note. Always call Swash his real dad. No need to remind him of Tony or the past. Bradley reached up and held my hand as we walked toward the street, looking for a taxi. I looked down, surprised by the simple gesture of trust. He smiled at me and I knew right then, I'd do anything for this kid. We got home at 6:20 p.m., thanks to the usual Friday traffic. I couldn't help but remember what Friday nights used to mean for me. Not anymore. Swash was at the dining table, working on his laptop, but I could tell he'd been waiting for us. What happened today? He asked. McDonald's, Bradley said proudly. I got a toy. That's nice. Think you'll still have room for dinner? Yeah. Bradley wants to visit the dinosaur museum, I added. You mean the field museum? Sure. I had no idea. Swash smiled and closed his laptop. We can go tomorrow. You mean you're not working? Swash stood up and ruffled Bradley's hair as he tried to figure out his new toy. I always have work, but I also have a son. Guess which one is more important? Bradley smiled, maybe at Swash's words, maybe at the toy finally working. Either way, it was a good moment. So, what's for dinner? I asked. Fast food never filled me up for long. Swash shrugged casually. I don't know. I frowned at him. He laughed at my expression. I'm kidding. Mac and cheese. With meat? Bradley asked hopefully. Of course. Shredded chicken. Cool. But first, Swash added, we have to make it. I groaned dramatically. He raised an eyebrow at me. You're not the kid here. But I'm hungry, I whined playfully, attempting a cute face. Swash smiled. You can grate the cheese. I sighed in defeat. All right. Cooking actually turned out to be fun. Swash stuck to a simple macaroni and cheese recipe, but adding shredded chicken made it even better. I tried sneaking tastes, but Swash caught me every time, smacking my hand away and laughing. Bradley busied himself with his toy until he lost interest, then switched to watching National Geographic. Good choice, honestly. Once dinner was finally ready, we sat down together. This time, Bradley joined in our casual conversation more than usual, tossing out little facts and asking random questions. He even asked me what I did for work and if I'd be living with them forever. I avoided the first question with a half-truth and answered the second with a gentle, no, but I'll visit a lot. Bradley smiled at that. I wasn't sure if he was happy that I'd be around, or happy that I'd eventually leave. Either way, I let it be. After dinner, I offered to do the dishes so Swash could catch up on work. If tomorrow was really going to be a museum day, he needed the time. He thanked me before settling back at his laptop. Whatever he was working on, it clearly mattered to him. Meanwhile, Bradley switched to the Discovery Channel. Of course, they were doing a special on dinosaurs. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Bradley just had good timing. And then, from the kitchen, I heard his small voice. Dad. Swash looked up immediately, his expression carefully neutral. Bradley stood there, his face serious, his tone quiet. What's a bad word? I froze, unsure what was coming. Swash's eyes widened slightly. What word, buddy? Bradley hesitated, glancing between both of us. Then, in the most innocent voice imaginable, he said, What's a faggot? Swash's jaw dropped. My heart sank. Bradley looked back and forth between us, waiting patiently for his answer. Neither of us spoke. Swash's expression said it all. Oh no, not this. Bradley stood there, waiting for an answer. I watched Swash shift nervously in his seat, his expression a storm of emotions. Hurt, anger, shock, disappointment, all tangled together. My own chest tightened. This situation was painfully awkward. Swash looked like he wished he could disappear. I remembered how uncomfortable my parents were when they gave me the talk years ago. I'd accidentally made things worse by not locking the bathroom door. My mom had blushed, my dad looked like he wanted to sink through the floor, and my brother had laughed until he cried. I let them give me the talk even though I'd learned everything on my own long before. Now, Swash looked at me the same way my parents once did, silently begging for help. I cleared my throat. Bradley, that's not a very nice word. I thought so. But what does it mean? Swash still hadn't moved. I realized if anyone was going to handle this, it had to be me. I walked over and crouched down so Bradley and I were at eye level. Well, a long time ago, it actually meant something completely different. I think it was even a type of food in England, like a sandwich or something. He looked confused, so I hurried on. But today, it's a word people sometimes use to insult someone who's gay. He frowned. I could tell he wasn't quite following me. What's gay? He asked innocently. I sighed silently. This conversation wasn't getting any easier. It's when a boy has feelings for another boy. Like how your mom has feelings for your dad. Except instead of a boy liking a girl, it's two boys who like each other that way. He blinked a few times. Is my mom gay? She has feelings for dad. No, I said gently. Your mom likes your dad, so she's not gay. But if someone like your dad liked another man in that same way, then that's called being gay. Oh. His face was blank. I wasn't sure if I'd explained it clearly, but then his eyes brightened as he asked his next question. Are you gay, Michael? I was caught off guard but answered without hesitation. Yes. He smiled at me. I like you. Does that mean I'm gay too? My face flushed. This was trickier than I expected. I glanced at Swash, whose eyes had widened in shock. I turned back to Bradley. Do you like me the same way your mom likes your dad, or like how you like your friends? He thought about that. Then his face relaxed, and he smiled confidently. Like my friends. I smiled back. No, you're not gay. Bradley gave me a satisfied nod, as if he'd solved a puzzle, and wandered back toward his beanbag chair to watch TV again. Just as he settled in, Swash spoke up. Brad. Bradley turned and raised his eyebrows, exactly the way Swash did when he was curious. I almost laughed at the resemblance. Who taught you that word? Swash asked, his voice tight. I could tell he wasn't just irritated, he was concerned. Dad used to say it, and Tracy Beetham. Swash and I both frowned at the same time, but for different reasons. The fact that Tony had said it was bad enough. But Tracy Beetham? That name made me uneasy. Swash's hands curled into fists. His gaze stayed fixed on Bradley, who had already returned his focus to the TV. Without thinking, I walked over and gently held Swash's hand, trying to calm him. His intense expression made me nervous. It reminded me of the locker room that day. He blinked and looked at me, surprised. People aren't always what they seem, Swash, I said softly. Tony could have been hiding a lot more than we knew. I stopped myself from saying anything more. Too late. Swash pulled his hand from mine and stormed off into his room without saying a word. Bradley stayed where he was, oblivious to everything. I stood there, unsure what to do next. Tony, wherever you are, I really hope you're sorry. Later that night, Bradley had gone to bed, but I was still sitting in the kitchen. I couldn't sleep. I'd spent the last hour watching Mythbusters, but I wasn't really paying attention. My mind kept going back to Swash. Eventually, I stood up and, without thinking, wandered toward his room. He was lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I hesitated in the doorway but didn't leave. If there was anything I could do to help him, I wanted to try. Swash, I said quietly. He looked at me but didn't speak. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You were right. I blinked. I don't want you to do anything you'll regret. I won't. He sat up slowly and looked at me. His eyes were sad and frustrated all at once. Good. Don't get me wrong. I want to. Every part of me wants to drive to Columbus right now, drag Tony into a dark alley, and beat him senseless. I snorted despite myself. Swash glanced at me, then cracked a small, awkward smile. I thought for a second, then got an idea. I know one way to help you let off some steam. What? Come with me. I walked out of his room without explaining, and after a moment, I heard him follow. I went to his laptop, relieved it hadn't logged out, and opened the browser. Swash stood beside me, looking confused. Video games? He asked skeptically. Trust me, I said. They're therapeutic. He chuckled but didn't stop me. I clicked on a simple arcade game and stepped back. Play this. At first, he looked unsure, but once he got the hang of it, he started laughing. A real, genuine laugh. I watched him for a moment, then smiled quietly to myself. My work here was done. I headed to my room feeling satisfied. Finally, Swash was laughing again. It was 2 a.m. when I left my room to use the bathroom. I blinked against the brightness of the living room lights and saw Swash still sitting at his computer, typing furiously. Swash. He looked up reluctantly, grinning a little too innocently. Don't tell me you're still playing, I said, raising an eyebrow. I won't. His grin widened. I walked over to check the screen. He had upgraded every weapon and piece of armor to gold. I rubbed my tired eyes. What have I created? You created a monster. You do remember we're supposed to visit the museum today? Or, technically, later this morning. But I forgot. Can I save this? I think it saves automatically. But, just to be safe, don't close the window. He stretched as he stood, flexing muscles without even trying. I caught myself staring but quickly looked away. He yawned and lightly tapped my shoulder. Thanks. I actually feel a lot better. Told you gaming helps. Then, casually, he leaned over and kissed my cheek before walking toward his room. I stood there, stunned. Did he just kiss me? I touched my cheek, still not sure it really happened. My mind raced. Maybe it was just a friendly gesture? Swash could be unpredictable like that, but with all the glances, playful teasing, and lingering stares, was it still just friendly? Part of me told myself to stop overthinking. Another part of me quietly wished he'd kissed me somewhere else. And then came the guilt. Malone. I thought of his smile, his warmth, and the night we said, I love you. Now, here I was, standing in Swash's living room, questioning my heart over one simple kiss. I sighed heavily. Swash, learn to close your windows, I muttered, shaking my head. I woke up late the next morning, depending on what counts as late on a Saturday. The clock said 10:23 a.m. I dragged myself out of bed, feeling drained and hungry. I stretched, headed for the bathroom, then froze. Bradley was curled up on the other side of my bed. I stood there, completely confused. I sat gently beside him, and the movement woke him up. He looked at me briefly, then turned away without saying anything. Bradley? Why are you in my bed? He kept staring at the wall. His voice was small. I had a bad dream. The men in my dream were really scary. He'd come to me for comfort. But, why didn't you go to your dad? Bradley hesitated. Dad was in the dream. He was the scariest. My heart sank. Dad was trying to catch me. He said if I went to real Dad, he'd hurt me. I wrapped my arms around him without thinking. No one's going to hurt you, Bradley. I know. You're here now. His words melted me. And that's when my own warning bells rang. You're getting attached, Michael. Don't forget, this isn't permanent. In a week, you'll be gone. I let him go, trying to keep some distance, and walked out of the room, needing space. Bradley followed me silently. We ended up watching a nature documentary on TV together. My stomach kept growling, so I got up to make breakfast. By the time Swash appeared, looking tired but content, Bradley and I had finished 2 slices of toast and emptied a carton of milk. I'd eaten most of it, but Bradley helped. He had been chatting nonstop about dinosaurs. He wanted to see a real one. I told him that bones were proof enough, and museum models were the next best thing, without the risk of being eaten. That made him laugh. Swash smiled as he joined us and whipped up eggs and ham. It turned into a proper breakfast feast. Afterward, while everyone cleaned up, we all went to get ready for the museum. Bradley sat up front in the car while I took the back seat. His random questions filled the drive. Did all dinosaurs eat meat? I tried to answer, but eventually left the trickier ones to Swash. My usual quiet stare out of the window and think, time was officially stolen by a curious 4-year-old. As we drove alongside Lake Michigan, the cold air drifted in. Bradley rolled up his window quickly. I, however, let the wind sting my face. I closed my eyes, enjoying the chill. Mike, what are you doing? Swash's voice came from the front. I opened my eyes and saw him looking at me through the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just feeling the wind. You looked like you were about to. He grinned and glanced at Bradley. Really, Swash? I can't close my eyes for 5 seconds without your mind wandering. He laughed. I'm just saying what I see. You were really embracing Mother Nature. I rolled my eyes. Be grateful I like Bradley enough not to let you drive him into foster care. We both laughed at that. Even Bradley turned around, confused at hearing his name. Seeing his puzzled face only made us laugh harder. Eventually, the car slowed at a red light. We all went quiet. Bradley drummed his fingers softly on his window. I started tapping along on mine, creating a simple beat. He turned and smiled at me, joining in. The rhythm grew until the light turned green. I looked up and my heart skipped. The driver of the car ahead had turned around, and staring right back at me was Malone. My breath caught. Oh no. Thanks for listening to today's BL story. If it made your heart skip a beat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Only here on BL Stories, where love knows no limits.